Resources Office. And basically, we provide accommodations for students with disabilities while they're in college. So I do have a PowerPoint that I was going to try. I'm hoping I can pull it up. I don't know if there's special authorization I need, but let me try to share screen here.
You should have it, Rene. You're a co-host.
Okay. Share. Okay, so and I keep getting these pop-ups. The meeting's being recorded. All right, are you guys able to share? Do you see my from IDEA to ADA?
Yes, we see your screen.
Perfect. Okay, wonderful. So, and actually it's probably good that we're starting early because I have a lot of slides and I'm thinking, how am I going to be able to do this in 20 minutes? So if I might go over a few minutes, hopefully that's okay with everybody. So one of the biggest things in transitioning from college in terms of disability services from high school is that the student actually is responsible for self-reporting to the ADR office and submitting their disability documentation. In high schools, I think that's a lot of times that's already like preset, right? We have parents, we have IEP teachers, transition people, kind of, I don't want to say chasing the student down, but you know what I mean? Serving the student in that manner. And so in our program, it's basically, it's voluntary for a student to participate. A school's not going to call us up and say, hey, I've got this Johnny and he needs to be, reach out for services. Can you call him? We don't do that sort of thing. So it has to be the student coming to us. Parents a lot of times refer their students, right? And they do have access to information if the student's 18. However, the FERPA has to be signed. And I imagine most of you are familiar with FERPA, right? Shaking heads. Okay. If you have a question, kind of jump in or at the end, you can ask them as well. So basically also on the PowerPoint, you'll see that high school accommodations are really about success, right? Making sure that the student graduates and goes on to that next step, whatever that might be. When we look at the college accommodations, they're really more about access. Not to say we don't want students to be successful, we do, but it's not guaranteed that they're gonna pass their classes, right? Or, get A's because they have accommodations. In saying that, each student, whether they're disabled or non-disabled, is expected to meet the same course objectives and requirements as the class. And so there are definitely differences in accommodations. All right, so I'm moving on. Everybody's still good, right? We're still seeing everything good? All right, I guess I'm a little paranoid. Yep. So true or false, or kind of like a myth buster here, we'll have a couple of these. Every accommodation I've received in high school will automatically be given to me in college. Would anybody want to shout it out? I kind of answered it already.
No.
False, right? No, that is a myth. Good job, you guys are pros. So false. So again, the IDEA is a high school. The colleges and universities work under what's called the ADA, or I think it's actually like ADAAA. I think there's 3 A's after it now, and Section 504 of the Rehab Act. In those federal laws, the college curriculum is not modified for students with disabilities, whereas an IDEA curriculum is modified for some students, right? And then accommodations for college students are, determined on a case-by-case process, an interactive process with the student. And we talk with the student, we gather documentation, we look at that, we talk about their classes if they're in them currently, and what are their barriers, what are they experiencing in terms of, their disability, getting, prohibiting access kind of thing. Okay, true or false, or myth buster number 2. Registering with Access and Disability Resources guarantees that I will pass my class. False, right? And this is kind of a strange one, because a lot of times I will have instructors at college, ask me, well, this is a student who's ADR, do I have to pass them? And I say, well, no, if they're not doing the work, right? If they're not turning in their homework, if they're not passing the tests, you don't you shouldn't pass them, right? We want to treat them the same and hold them to the same standards. But we also want to make sure that they're receiving their accommodations. So sometimes if they're not receiving their accommodations, we need to intervene and make sure they're receiving them to make sure that they have the access. Okay, so again, passing class in the hands of the student. Grades given on quantity and quality of work, not just individual effort. I think that's a big difference we see as well. Sometimes you get students who really, really work so hard and your heart goes out to them, but they just aren't able, in some cases, to be successful. And, you want to pass them, right? Because they're working so hard and they're putting in so many hours. But again, it's not based on the effort. It's based on the, learning objectives, and are they being met as the instructor has put them into place. We cannot change, and we will not request that an instructor change their policy for one student, in the class. So last one that we have for true or false: an accommodation request made by one student may be approved, but the same request by another student might be denied. Yep. True, right.
True.
Exactly. I had to throw a true in there just to throw you guys off. So we look at a couple of different things when we're, considering requests that a student makes. Does the documentation support the request, right? Why is the student making the request? Is there a disability related barrier that the accommodation will address? And we'll talk about these a little bit more. I'm trying to get through my notes because I have a couple of little things. Notes at on my desk here. Will approving the request change the course objectives or give the student an unfair advantage? And then the last one on the list, accommodations are not cookie cutter, but again, they are individualized. I've actually had students come to me and say, I have ADHD and I had an IEP in high school. What can I get? Expecting like a checklist, right? And it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. Where they'll expect where they can just check off, oh yeah, I need this, this, and this. And there's so many accommodations, and there's accommodations that we can customize to students. Again, that individualized piece. So we don't have a list of accommodations where they just check off what they need. It's really the discussion, the interaction, talking with the student, talking about class, looking at their documentation, all of those things kind of come into play. Another example, a different example is, why is the student making the request? I'll have a student tell me, well, I'm working full time. And this happens a lot. I have to take my younger siblings to school in the morning. I'm working, I'm going to school, and I'm doing these things for my family. So there's just not enough hours in the day. I need an extended deadline in my homework. And those are tough. We feel for the people, right? We feel for the student who's in that situation, but that's not a disability related reason why. It has to be disability related reason. So this kind of goes to that. The reason for an accommodation has to be related to disability. If somebody has poor study habits, if they don't have good coping skills, or they're really terrible with their time management, or they procrastinate, I think we all do that sometimes to some extent, or they have family and work obligations, those aren't reasons for providing an accommodation. We talk to students sometimes, and you'll ask them, well, how many credits are you taking? Well, I'm taking 15 credits. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of credits, especially for a new student or somebody who's transitioning from, maybe having special education services. I usually recommend don't take a full load, take 2 classes to start, work your way up, as you kind of get into the swing of things. Or they'll take an accelerated class that sometimes a student might not realize. We have 16-week classes, we have 8-week classes. The 8-week classes cover the same amount of material as a 16-week class in half the time. So as you can imagine, the students going, they're like freaking out because they're doing twice as much work in half the time. And so it's really hard to, sometimes for them to keep up. And so again, I don't typically recommend those 8-week classes for any of the students coming from having, IEP services. They can try it if they really, really want, but I usually am like, yeah, you know, I usually try to give them the true story about how that class is going to be. All right. So some frequently requested accommodations. A lot of you probably have heard some of these extra time on exams and quizzes, reduced distraction setting for taking a test, or sometimes even a dedicated quiet room. You know, student might want to, some students will say, I like to read out loud to myself because you know, hearing it being read out loud is helpful, and they can't do that in the classroom or in the bigger testing center area. They need to have a separate room. Maybe they're using special software to have them read information, or if they're visually impaired, they might be using a screen reader. And so again, they might use a quiet room, for example. We have students who, due to reading difficulties, due to ADHD, that kind of thing, might use what we call e-text. So they want their books in a digital format. And, you know, they can get not just books, but they can get, you know, other materials that in digital format, so that they can have that read out loud. And again, that all depends on, you know, what is the disability, what's the barrier, you know, those kinds of things. We don't just give, you know, digital books to everybody, although, you know, the college is kind of moving to more digital material now, just as a whole. So some students will say, I'm really bad at taking notes. I need note-taking help. And there's all different kinds of ways that that we can address note-taking for students. And we talk to the student about which way is going to be, you know, best for them. Students who might have a math disability might get approved to use a calculator, or even like something like a formula card on an exam. Okay. Students might want to be able to take breaks, whether it's in the class due to anxiety or something, or maybe it's during testing. They need to kind of break things up a little bit for them, for themselves. So though that's something else. And then some attendance flexibility. That's more for students who have some, maybe have some chronic health conditions, and who might end up in the hospital every so often for, you know, for treatments or that kind of thing. And so they might miss class because of that issue. So there might be some attendance flexibility, you know, for that. So what we're seeing more of in terms of since the pandemic, we are seeing more of people asking for extended deadlines and more time to complete homework assignments. We have a lot of, you know, we can speculate on why that is. You know, more people, maybe in high school during the pandemic, that was something that was being given more. More people are now getting back to work and trying to support families after some tough financial times. And so, you know, they've got more on their plate, so they need more time. We're seeing more open notes, requests for open notes on exams and quizzes. And again, I think that might be because when classes were all, you know, virtual or online for the high schools, I think that was more common perhaps. And again, in college, you might have an instructor who does allow open note exams, or does give open note exams in one class, and you might have an instructor in the same class, a different instructor in the same class, who does not, right, does not allow open note exams, or might give exams in a different format. Their exams might be more essay related versus multiple choice. And then requests related to test anxiety. So basically, test anxiety in and of itself is not considered a disability, right? There has to be another, you know, condition, whether it's generalized anxiety or something like that. I mean, I raise your hand if you haven't taken a test and gotten anxious at some point in time, right? We all have some bit of test anxiety, I think. So, but a lot of times those students will tell us, I have test anxiety. Well, what else is going on? You know, that's alone is not a disability. What we don't provide in college is, in terms of ADR, we don't provide financial aid to students. Now, financial aid is available, right, through the college, but it's just not something, ADR does not have like a specific scholarship or anything that we provide. We don't do any career counseling, but we do have counselors here who do help with those kinds of things. And we have classes too that can help students who are undecided about a career. I want to say it's maybe STU 107 or something is one of those. And we don't, at Pima, we don't have early bird class registration. A lot of times people think, oh, well, they're an ADR student, they're going to be able to register first. I think they might have it at U of A, and if anybody knows, chime in and say that they do. I think they might have priority registration at some of the bigger universities, but we do not at Pima. Personal assistant services, we don't have. So that would be if we have a student who maybe has some significant physical limitations, or maybe they use a wheelchair and they need help when they're eating, or they need help when they're using the restroom. Those kinds of things. They would need to bring, if they had a personal assistant that they had at home or that goes with them in the community, that person would actually come with them to Pima. Now, we do have what's called an access assistant, and that would be an ADR accommodation. That would be somebody in the classroom who might provide access, right? So maybe it's somebody who's blind and needs the access assistant to read them something, right? Or somebody who has a physical issue, can't get something out of their backpack, can't turn the page in a book, right? Or that kind of thing, or participate in a lab. And so that may have an extra set of hands, right? Those are access assistants, and those are provided by ADR as an accommodation, but it's different than a personal assistant. We don't have transportation. Students do come and ride Sunban or Handycar, but we don't have any play in approving any kind of paratransit services. Most of the students already have that lined up when they're coming here. And we don't have transportation between campuses. So if a student has a class at Desert Vista and they need to get over to West Campus in an hour, they're probably going to be either driving or taking the bus, right? Because we used to, many, many years ago, we used to have a shuttle that would go around, but we don't. I wish we did. And one of the last things we don't provide is tutoring. Now, the ADR department itself does not provide tutoring. However, we do have a learning center and tutoring supports that are available for all individuals. So that's kind of on next slide there, it's lower. We have what ADR has also is we have something called a PACE program. I think if any of you were at our spring event, you might have heard from Cindy. And that is ADR students only, and it's personalized academic coaching experience. So kind of a mentoring, works with students on a bunch of different issues. We have TRIO student support services. You might have heard Nancy Keller also at that spring event talk about her TRIO program. Some are especially for disabled individuals or disabled students, and then other TRIO programs, they do not require it. You can have a disability, but it's not required. With one of the TRIO SOAR program, having a disability is like is a requirement to receive services from them.
There's a couple questions in the chat, Renee, if you want me to read them out to you.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
Does the Center for Disability Resource at a specific school determine the accommodations and pass them on to the instructor?
Oh, right. So we do notify the instructors after we meet with the student. We set up their accommodations, right? And we discuss each class. What do you need for this class? We end up notifying the instructor by email as to what those accommodations are. And then if needed, we talk to the instructor about how to implement those. But a lot of the times it's just the email, they're informed, but the instructor's never given information about the student's disability that is confidential. Okay. Was that the question? I hope I answered that question as it was intended.
I think so.
Okay. Any
All
others?
right. Yep, there's one more. What about interpreters? Are they provided by?
Yes, so interpreters, we do provide interpreters. I didn't include that on here, but definitely ASL interpreters can be requested by a student. They can, there's an interpreting at pima.edu email that a student can send information to and they can say, I have an appointment with an advisor, or I have an appointment with a financial aid person on Thursday at 10, I need an interpreter. Several days advance notice, I would say at least 4 days is probably, good for us to try to get somebody arranged. And if they're virtual meetings, I had a counselor meeting with a student virtually. We have interpreters that can log in. So whether it's in person or virtual, interpreters can be provided. And if a student comes to my office and schedules an appointment with me, oftentimes I'll just say, I'll email and set up the interpreter for them. But if they're not already with ADR, they can do that interpreting at pima.edu to get there, to request what they need and where and what time, just all those details.
All right, thank you. That's all for the chat for right now.
Okay. So we, again, special student resources, we have academic success counselors, we have coaches, sometimes for specific programs, you might have a counselor, or you might have a success coach for a specific class. So lots of different things there. Again, the Learning Center and the tutoring, that's free for anybody. That's for all students. And then we also have a tech corner up in most of our libraries. I think that there's a little space where students having a problem with their computer or their hardware or software. They can't log into my Pima and they need a little tech support. Then they can go there as well, which is kind of nice. So what can we do to help our students now? How are we doing on time wise? I think we're okay, right?
You're good.
Okay, so what we can do now, or if you're a high school teacher, or if you're a parent, you know, have the students kind of review their IEPs, let them be familiar with what it says in there, so that they can actually say what their disability is. A lot of times too, I'll have a student I'm meeting with, and I'll say, well, they don't have their IEP yet, they haven't turned it in, and I'll ask them, well, what's your disability? Do you know what it says? Well, I don't really know. You know, they'll actually say, I don't really. I'm like, okay, you know, so you know, sometimes you have to sort of guess, right, until you get that documentation. So it's really good if the student actually knows, well, yeah, you know what, I had it because I really struggled with reading, or you know, I reversed my letters or numbers, or I have ADHD, you know, I have depression or bipolar disorder, and so sometimes I had tough times, right? And so if they can at least, you know, talk to us about that and know why they had an IEP, that's really helpful. Having them practice now while they're still in high school, that self-advocacy piece, because again, they're going to need it when they come here. They're going to have to reach out to ADR. We're not going to chase down the hallway saying, wait, come to ADR. Have them know what works for them versus what doesn't. A lot of times I'll ask students, well, what are your strengths? What are you good at? And, you know, what are your needs? What are you not so good at? Right. So for them to know that is helpful. STU classes right now are free. They have been for quite a while, actually, since the pandemic, and that is continuing. So encouraging them to take STU 100 is the sort of college success class. They learn different things like note taking, you know, time management, testing, you know, like testing tips and things of that nature. A lot of the classes will get a little bit, they'll do them on a scavenger hunt. I saw one of the classes do this, and it was kind of fun, and they had to go to different places and get different information and find things, you know, and it was a good way for the student to kind of get around, learn about campus, learn about the programs, you know, so that they knew next time if they needed something, where to go. So STU classes are great. And then I use this little, now for students, the little, what is acronym, MOP UP, right? Have them work on managing their time, organizing what they have to do and when, and then prioritizing their assignments. What has to be done now versus what has to be done later, right? Students, I think, sometimes want to put things off, you know, because they don't like it, but maybe that assignment is due in 2 days, you know, do that one if it's due first, you know, wait on the paper that's due in 3 weeks, right? And then kind of just having the students ask themselves, am I ready for college? Do I have the motivation, desire, and ability to meet college course requirements? And then will I be able to understand material knowing that there isn't a resource room or a modified curriculum? And managing time effectively, again, knowing that the vast majority of the work that you do, the homework that you do in college, is done outside of class. And I think that's a big difference too, right? A lot of times in high school, you have like a free period, right? Or study hall or something where students can work, or after class, they might go to a teacher for help. Those are going to be, you know, those don't exist, right? At college, you don't have a study hall period. So you go up to the learning center and you study and work, or you get tutoring, but that's all on, you to do outside after class or before class. Helpful hints for students. Again, this is something I'll tell the students to think about: taking fewer courses. Don't overload yourself. Be mindful of the format of the class and the location. Is that a good fit for you, right? So we have a whole ton of class formats now. We have in person, right, which is what we had before the pandemic. We had some online before the pandemic too, but now we have a lot more virtual and online. And we have some that are hybrid, right? They might come to class once a week in person, and they might do online stuff or virtual stuff, meaning like a Zoom, right? A Zoom classroom. They might do that once a week. And then we're talking about having high flex coming soon, which would be some students might be sitting in the classroom, and we might have some students logging in from home. You know, we are waiting for some technology to do some of that high flex stuff, but that might be on the horizon as well. Having kids keep a consistent study time, you know, maybe setting it up their schedule each day. They play video games for an hour or two after school, but then, you know, an hour before after dinner, they're doing homework, right? So even just planning time for fun, to relax with their friends, but also planning time for the schoolwork. Kids are going to get their class syllabus the very first day they go to class. And that's going to have dates and deadlines on it. It's going to have when a paper is due. It's going to have the test dates. So they can kind of plan ahead, right, as to when they're going to have things to be done. And again, student services, program advisors, you know, if it's a accommodation issue, they come to ADR, right? If it's a registration issue and my class, can I take this class? Does it fit with my major? That's going to be an advisor, a program advisor. Okay. So last slide here, countdown to fall, what they can be doing now, you know, checking their school records, 5, applying online, and that the Pima.edu is the Pima application, right? The ADR application is going to be down there at the very last step. After they graduate in May and take their assessments, they can do the ADR online application. And these will actually link you to, like, if I'm going to click here, hopefully this is still working. You guys see some nursing students up at the top in the ADR page?
Yep.
All right. So they can come right here. They can go to virtual office hours to ask questions, or they can go right here to request request services, or here to the blue application, and it will link them right where they need to go. Okay. Okay, how do I get out of this one now? Hopefully. I can't. I don't know how to get back to my maybe just exit.
And share, and then share again if you have to.
Yeah, maybe I'll stop share.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'll work. You could also click Zoom along the bottom, but
Oh, you know what? I
Renee.
could have just
Thank
gone
you.
back. I figured it out. I could have just gone back because I still have it.
No worries. There were a few questions in the chat, Renee. So can I ask you while you're navigating?
Yeah. Did it go back up? Did it come back up?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Your slides are up.
Yeah. So my last slide.
So one of the
actually,
questions is,
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. But my contact info is up there, my email, my office phone, if you have questions later. And then also just general ADR. We have an ADR help at Pima, and then the phone number, that's our phone number for our West campus, but we do have ADR offices at each campus. So go ahead with questions. Sorry.
No, you're good. Thank you for that. Do the STU classes include credits?
So STU classes are, let me stop sharing here. Okay. STU classes are typically just 1 credit, and they're not transferable though, right? So that it's not, you're not going to take a STU class and be able to transfer it to the U of A for credit. It's more of a, like a educational development for the student. So yeah, so the STU classes, and they're just 1 credit. They usually meet like maybe once a week for like an hour, right? Whereas your other classes, If you're taking a reading class, you might meet on Monday and Wednesday for 2 hours, right? Some of our math classes, we have some, our lower level math class is called intermediate college skills, like for math. And that meets for 4 days a week for just like an hour and 15 minutes. So, that's more sort of like the high school kind of, style class. But most of the time classes are just twice a week, STU once a week. So.
Sounds good. I don't think we have any more questions in the chat unless anybody wants to unmute and ask. It's perfectly fine too.
Yeah. And you
I just
can
wanted to
speak with
know,
something later. You can let me know.
I just wanted to know, do you offer like ASL interpreters?
Oh, ASL interpreters. Yes, right. So we do, I think I talked about that earlier, students.
I had to step away, so I missed it.
Oh, okay, no worries, no worries.
Sorry,
No, you're fine. So
emergencies,
we do, yeah, it happens, it happens. So yes, we do provide ASL interpreters, and whether it's for a student has a meeting with an advisor, or if they're in class and they need an interpreter every Monday and Wednesday from 2 to 3:30. We can set up that schedule and have interpreters there for the student.
Good.
And for any kind of meeting activity, if they're going to some sort of club meeting or student life meeting, they need to have an interpreter there, anything related to college activity, programming, class. And there's that, I can put it in the, let's see, in the chat. I'll put in it's interpreting at Pima.edu. I think I hopefully spelled it right. And a student can request an interpreter that route. They can come into to campus and request it, but not the day of, right? The meeting. They have to
Right.
give advance notice, usually about I say 3 to 4 days advance notice, so our department can get somebody assigned. And that holds true for virtual meetings too, whether it's an in-person or a virtual meeting, we can set up the interpreting. All right.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Well, thank you, Miss Renee.
Thank you guys for having.
We appreciate having you. Awesome. You're getting lots of awesomes and great presentation in the
awesome.
chat. So
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. All right. Our next presenter is Miss Deborah Winn from CareerLinks. Oh, yep. More great presentations, Renee.
Renee, would you do my presentation, please? That'd be great.
You know what? I would love to, but I don't know. I wouldn't know word one about about that. So you'll do great. I know it.
You know what's really interesting? I'll start by saying what I find super interesting is that a lot of the accommodations are the same as they are that you request from an employer, although an employer is not going to have someone there to take notes for you or that kind of thing. You get a coach through VR or whatever, through DD, whatever, your resources are. So, but there's so many similarities. So I like the theme because there's so much to talk about for both, really. And I think one carries over to the other. So, okay, let me do what Rene did and pull up my PowerPoint so I can stay on task. So thank you, everyone. I'm Deborah Winn with CareerLink. If you don't know me, which you probably mostly do, I am not big on presenting, but Heather asked me. So of course, I'm not going to tell her no. And I'm great at conversation. So just let's have a conversation. Let's mentally think of it that way. But I did do a PowerPoint so I can try and stay on task. So here we go. As soon as I can share my screen, and then you all nod when you see my PowerPoint. Okay, good. So if you didn't read my bio, I don't know if I mentioned this, but in this picture is a bridge. Does anybody, Steve, know what that bridge is? He walked away, didn't he? Um,
It looks familiar, but I can't place it.
that's the Yaquina Bay Bridge in Newport, Oregon. And
That's why it looks familiar.
I know, and I asked you on purpose. So where we started was way back 20 plus years ago, right under this bridge. And I know that sounds funny, but my mom, I think it's important to know this, to understand that what we focus on is real people, real situations, real life, and it all comes into play. And accommodations are more than wheelchair access and all those things. You really got to get creative. But my mom started doing what I do here, and she does it here now too, under that bridge from a sailboat that she lived on. And she worked in 5 counties in Oregon. And it's, to me, really important to remember where we came from and how things came from nothing, because that's how life works. You start down here and you just work your way up, and that's problem solving. So from there, here I go. Accommodations in the workplace. I better move this thing. How do you shrink that? Or do I have to have it there? Everyone. Let's see. Oh, there we go.
We don't see anything, Deborah. So
Oh, well,
if you
I
need
have your
to
face-
like minimize, yeah,
I
if you
did.
need to click the minimize button, that's
did.
fine.
It worked.
We just see
Yay.
your screen and you.
I just saw everyone and I was like, where's my thing? Okay. So accommodations in the workplace. We all know what accommodations look like. The ADA has specific policies. And I think it's very important to remember a couple of things. The reason I put this up on here is because it does say perform the essential functions of a job. You must be able to perform the essential functions of a job. Reasonable accommodations should not be viewed as special treatment. And what's important about that is a lot of our people, a lot of our clients, or the client's parents will say, well, why can't they do just this part of that job because they can't do the whole thing? Because the employer doesn't have to change a thing. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. But, we follow the rules and we bend employers as much as they'll let us. Again, it's creativity. So the most common accommodations, basically, and I have notes too, physical changes, ramps, modifying the layout of a workspace. Then we have assistive technology, sign language interpreters, materials in Braille, accessible communications, technology, all those things come into play. And they're really kind of limitless, but an employer won't always pay for that or provide that. Many do. So what I tell the folks and what I do with our clients or anybody I talk to that has questions about it is before you go into a job application and complete it, make sure you understand what that job is. What does it look like in real life? If you can, go and observe it. So that way you can kind of get an idea of what is reasonable and what will not be. Smaller companies will tend to be able to do a lot more. Although nowadays, even the most simplest of jobs for people with a lot of limitations are disappearing because, budgets go up, payroll goes down. It's just harder and harder. But anyway, it's really important to look at these jobs and know what you're going to need. Just like Rene said, people come in with their lists, and I've had clients come in with huge lists that I've had to sit with them and go, okay, half of these are not going to work for what you're looking for, but what will? There's never a no, there's always a, well, what else is there? It's really about being realistic and creative. I also find it very helpful with or without the client to talk with the employer, find out what are their processes, their expectations, and, you know, keeping maybe a certain person in mind. Would they have the flexibility to make changes in schedule or, you know, whatever? There's so many different variables here, but it's so important to know exactly what is that job. What do they expect? What does that job description say? And can you do everything on it? And if there's 2 things on it you can't do, can you get that accommodated? But if that's the whole point of the job, then very unlikely. So again, reality, you know, people have expectations of what they want. I want to work with animals. I want to do this. I want to do that. There's so many things in play. And the most important thing is to understand, what does the employer want? And can you bring it to them with reasonable accommodation? Let's see here. So when do you request accommodations? I've had clients come to me again with that list, but really in letter form. So when they go to an interview, they want to give it to the employer right then and there. However, depending on the employer, and if you know them or you've talked to them before, you know what they do, you're fully informed, you've done your research about the company, you can modify your letter to where it reads that you're giving something, but you're going to need a little support here, here, and here in that letter. I never recommend even bringing up accommodation until after you're offered a job or if they ask. Go into that interview knowing what you can do, what you can learn, what your growth might look like. And at that time, a lot of times they'll ask, what kind of accommodation are you going to need? But more often than not, they really don't, because a lot of those managers know that you have a disability. They can tell just by your conversation or by the questions you're asking. And you kind of are going to know in that interview if you're going to be able to request those accommodations to get them met. Of course, they have to accommodate you to some extent. But for instance, courtesy clerks, really good example. So many clients, they don't want to do the cart collection. Well, if you don't do it and it's part of your courtesy clerk job, then nobody has to do it. And then they have nobody doing carts. But you can't make a company make that 2 separate jobs. You can't change the job. You can find ways to do it. And if it's not possible, you need to look for a different role that's more appropriate. The employer will
I think she
Doing
might be frozen. No,
Am I
we lost you for a minute.
here now?
You are.
You
Oh.
are here now.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I don't want to keep yapping if nobody's listening. Anyway, employers are usually really good about it, but even in a higher up type of role, a management role or something, they will make accommodations as long as you're able to perform your job. You just have to ask, but don't bring it up in the interview, because more often than not, the employer will feel that you're telling them what they have to do. And if they're not on the same wavelength as you are, they don't have to hire you, and you can't prove that it wasn't because of your disability. So the best thing to do is just kind of roll with it, because during onboarding, you can request those accommodations and formally. So letters are good because they go in your employee file. More than anything, take them what you have, what you can do, figure out the rest later. Let them have that conversation with you. Technology, working from home. Accommodations. A lot of clients that come through VR, they just go to VR because VR is going to buy them a computer, or they're going to get them this, and all this software. But no, they're not. Not unless you have a job that requires it, that you can successfully do, that the employer will not pay for. It is not a requirement. So, you know, and again, like Rene said, you have to have all the documentation to support it and have the financial need. But that goes with any kind of accommodation on any job. Some employers provide everything you need, some do not. We tend to place clients in roles that they're not required to supply their own technology, or they already have it, so it works. But that's never a for sure thing and needs to be investigated, and maybe a conversation with the employers. Working from home isn't always the best thing. It's what everybody got used to, but it's not always the best thing for everyone. So always know what your employer provides. Okay, so I have some examples of accommodations, and I meant it when I said you got to be really creative. Because, and I'm sure everyone, and Rene probably has some stories where you really had to go outside the box and figure it out for someone, because they really do have a disability. They really do want to work, but it's like a needle in a haystack. So, you know, think outside the box. I have a few examples. 2 clients, each needing part-time job. This is a true story, and I'll keep it really short. So let me find it here. They both needed part-time work, but only full-time was offered at the employer they were interested in. That employer was a manufacturer. We talked to that employer, and they only had one position, and it was full-time. It's what they do. They don't hire part-time. We said, hey, we have 2 clients, both very capable. You could have 2 part-time clients. They cover both ends of the shift. You know, all the collaborating worked because we had 2 clients working one job, and everybody was happy. So it took some real deep conversations and getting the employer to bend, but they did it. And it's been, I think, 6-7 years. Those clients are still working there. Schools, working for a school district or a government entity. One thing I have learned that's super important is right when you get hired, if you require accommodations, not only, you know, your managers know and they work with you just automatically, they're actually pretty good. The government, they're going to ask you in that interview. School districts, they may not, but you'll end up in the conversation and they'll just go with it. The most important thing to do is go on their website and start the process, because it's paperwork and it has to all get approved. And you have to provide your documentation, your doctor notes, all of that kind of thing. And once it's in there, it's fine. I've had really good experiences with TUSD, for example. We have a former client, legally blind. He's a custodian. He got a job at a resort as a public area attendant. His area of responsibility was the entire first floor of the resort, and executive office is on the 2nd floor. They have a cleaning cart, and it's shared by other attendants, which could cause a problem, because when you're blind, you have to know what you have. And if someone messes with it, it could be confusing and it could make you sick or even be deadly. So they actually were able to accommodate him with his own cart that was not shared. And it was checked every shift before he started to make sure everything was there. They used puffy stickers to put on the outside of chemical bottles so he'd know what was what. And he was able to refill them the same way. Keep everything stocked and whatnot. We worked with him quite extensively. A lot of details, probably the first 5-6 weeks. He had extra time to get to each restroom because he's going, long lengths. He was counting steps. We were doing it right there with him and making sure he got it down. And after several weeks, he got it down. He was able to do his complete job, but it took a lot of creative accommodations on the job and, also teaching others around him how to work with him. And that's another thing that's very common really with probably 90% of our clients. We need to teach their built-in supports, their coworkers, their managers, how to work with them. Just like we're teaching them how to deal with all these new people and so it's not always accommodation, but it kind of is because you're asking people to be understanding about certain things and work with them. And they do more often than not. Mental health clients. One situation, very recent, a client was on the job about 6-7 weeks and had to go to the hospital. And the company, the corporate company, had excellent management in place. And talking to them, they were able to provide me the paperwork so I could get it to the client. It took quite some time and a lot of effort, but they were able, and I was able to talk to their corporate HR people. They honored what they would provide someone that's been there for 6 months and basically gave her FMLA, but not paid, of course, and let her come back on her own time. And now returning part-time, they're allowing her to make her own schedule for a period of time until she can, get back into the swing of things and everything's all good. They're supporting their people. So again, more often than not, the employer, they've already spent the money training this person. They were happy with them. So they'll do the work to keep them there as long as they have support. Service dogs, requirements to get approved. I stuck Ask Jan on there because that's one of the best resources for accommodations and rules and policies and laws and ideas. So if I think you're probably all familiar with it, I would visit that site. I really squeezed this one out really fast. So does anyone have any questions? Because honestly, I'm really interested in things that all of you have maybe experienced because it's all helpful. We're all always learning from each other, and there's no just one way to make sure your client has accommodations. So I would love if anyone else has any thoughts on this.
We don't have any questions in the chat, but if anybody would like to just unmute and talk or share.
Yeah, the conversation. Anybody? Claudia? Claudia,
I have one.
go.
Okay, do you do customized employment?
We have always done customized employment and people,
Carving.
we've always done that. In fact, that's what that one example was, turning one job into two. Job share used to be a big thing in what, the 90s, 80s, 90s,
Yeah.
but not really so much anymore. And employers, they want to get as much bang for their buck as possible. It's all about the money.
Well, I should think with the job share though, that like they didn't get benefits because they were part-time, right?
Which saved the company money.
Right, yeah.
So it was great for all, and not to mention they were good people. So you don't always get good people. You can go to an employer and they might be having a bad day and they don't want to even talk to you about it. So,
Mhm.
you don't keep pestering them. You don't want to cause a volatile situation. Maybe give them time, go back later. Only a couple of times have I had to ever go over management's heads. But I have, and I will if it's appropriate.
Yeah,
The whole you catch more flies with honey, it's the truth.
yeah, it's true. And I shouldn't have said customized. I knew you did that. I meant job carving. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we do it. It's just not very often because it's not always necessary.
Yeah.
It can be done, but there's a lot of variables in that. It depends on the person. The person-centered employment services, that's all we've ever been. And it cracks me up because I've only recently really heard people talking about that. And I'm like, well, isn't that just being a human being, helping other humans and everything related to them being successful on their job? And that's just what we do. But the job carving, yeah, that definitely is possible if a company is able to be open to it. The shredding jobs are gone. So
Yeah.
no more of those, and no more filing jobs. Not really. The simpler jobs they just don't exist anymore. So technology is everything. And if a client understands technology and they might need some assistive technology to be able to utilize that, then there you go. Again, a lot of employers will provide that.
Mhm.
But oftentimes they don't. So it can be a challenge. Somebody that wants to work from home, but they can't afford internet. Well, what do? It's
Mhm.
very difficult. But for the most part, accommodations are just helping people get where they need to go and be happy and have the right support,
We do have a hand raised, Miss Fiona.
Go.
So my question for you is regarding ideas of accommodations for folks who are, nonverbal or close to it, or folks who have challenging behavioral issues. I feel like those are the areas that a lot of VR staff may struggle with when they get folks who have some of those challenges. So if you have ideas or about working, I know it's case by case, but you can think of any ideas or suggestions, that'd be great.
I know what you're saying. For me, I can only speak about what I think or what I do, but we have lots of clients that barely talk or don't want to talk. Some of that's maturity, give them time and put them around other people, good people of interest. They'll come out of their shell. If they cannot talk, they're still employable for the right employer that just needs them to do the job. And there's other ways for them to communicate. So behavioral issues, that's kind of like one of the examples I sort of touched on. The question I would have is it inappropriate behavioral issue? Is it anger? Is it that kind of thing? Because anything where there's any kind of customer service or working for others, that's 99.9% of the time not going to be tolerated. Unless there's coping skills in place, then you might be able to get an employer to be able to give a timeout, plan of some sort, depending on the situation, the employer, because anything that's a liability is the concern. It's all about liability. It's all about money where the employers are concerned for the most part, for competitive employment. Does that answer your question?
She's
Yes, thank
nodding
you.
her head. Yes,
Oh, I don't see her. I'll turn this off. I'll stop sharing.
no worries.
Yeah, it's just, oh, there we go. Yeah, it is case by case, but I know that I don't give up unless a client gives up and a counselor, we collaborate so much with the counselors because you know them on a different level or for a longer period of time, but in a different way. And sometimes we find things out that you didn't know. And so we have to collaborate a lot, right, Claudia? Keep pointing at you.
Absolutely.
But it's so important because sometimes that's how you figure it out.
Yeah,
Um,
I think, oh, I was gonna just jump in and give maybe another example of a young lady that we're working with together.
I was
And that's
thinking of
where
her.
And that's where I was able to share some information knowing her over the years. Because if you think about maybe how COVID and the pandemics affected some people and their skills, and maybe they
Yeah.
haven't been engaged in a couple of years, and maybe some of their job readiness skills are kind of rusty. And for this example, focus and some other issues were coming up for this young lady, and still are. She's still working on it. But I think one of the things that Deb was able to do was like to negotiate with the employer. Maybe there was like 5 essential functions of the job, but if she can really master 2 of the most important, they have other people that can go bring that product back to across the store, because that young lady's just never coming back. She's going to get distracted and be there for out. They have other people that can run that back. But if she could do the other essential functions of the job and get into the routine, kind of that's what we're working with. So I really appreciated, that creativity and us problem solving as a team.
I gotta tell you though, Claudia, what's helpful to this client you're speaking of, in her former job, they didn't work her enough. They didn't believe in her enough to work her enough, to train her enough, because she does need that extra time. This employer works really well with us and probably everybody else. I don't know. They just work. We have really good ability to say, oh, we're not giving up yet. We're able to do that. Even when they're like, they gave us more time and we're seeing improvements. It's just going to take more time. Everybody needs different, has different requirements. So, but I can think of a couple that are struggling right now, and the employers are awesome. And they're really, since COVID, they're really willing to do a lot more because people are desperate. They're sick of the turnover. As long as there's support, they'll do it. So thank you, everyone. I hope I was helpful, and you can always call me and pick my brain because I don't mind.
Thank you, Deborah. We appreciate you.
You're welcome.
Well, we had some wonderful presentation, guys. If anybody has any extra questions, feel free to either email us and we can get it to the presenters, or email presenters directly. They're more than happy. They're regulars pretty much on our little chat once a month. But I don't want to keep you from anything else. So to be respectful of your time, have a great evening. All right.